this week's Waves from the Word online Bible study. This week we are talking about Genesis chapter 11 through 15. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button down below and the new videos will be delivered directly to your inbox. Also, if you would like a copy of our free study guide, simply email me at the email below or visit www.gracegritandglam.com and complete the pop-up, and I'll be happy to email that your way. Let's get started. Today we start with chapter 11, and at this point in the world, everyone was speaking the same language. The people in the land of what was called Shinar felt like it would be a good idea to come together and build this huge tower and city to make them more powerful. This city was later called Babel, and instead of spreading throughout the world as God had commanded, they gathered together and stayed in this area. And God did not like what he saw. He began to witness their actions and their growing hunger for power and felt like that it must be stopped. Notice in verse 7, it gives us the indication that God is not alone. It says, "Let us go down," and there confused their language, meaning God was not alone in this. So we can take that as a reference to God having the Holy Spirit and Jesus present with him in that moment. At this point, he confused their language and forced them basically to spread throughout the world. And if you think about it, it would have been impossible to communicate with each other when they couldn't understand each other's language. So they basically had to disperse, which he had originally commanded anyway. If you think about it today, we see evil that is present when large groups of people gather together. If you look at some of our larger cities, even here in our own country, some of the things that happen when people are in close proximity and there are large numbers of people gathering together. The middle and end portion of chapter 11 discuss the lineage of Shem and Terah. We will later learn that Terah is actually the father of Abram, also known as Abraham. My takeaway in this chapter is this: God is always in control. No group of people can become strong enough or rally enough to overpower God. God may allow things to happen, but he can ultimately step in at any time. Chapter 12. If you have studied the Bible at all, you have heard of Abraham and Sarah, and today we're going to be meeting those two characters. God is actually instructing them both to leave the land that they are familiar with and go out on a journey. Can you imagine just picking up wherever you are and leaving, having no idea where you're headed, only that God will tell you where to go? You have to simply trust that God will tell you and will direct you. God was essentially calling Abram to a life of service. It's important to note that in chapter 12, we shift from focusing on the entire population of the world to just focusing on this specific family. This one family will eventually lead to the birth of Christ. Studies actually show that God had been silent for 10 generations and now has chosen to speak to Abram. Abram, Sarai, Abram's father Terah, and their nephew Lot set out on this journey. They headed to the land of Canaan, and during the time that they were in Shemek, God revealed to Abram that this was in fact the promised land. During their journey, there was a great famine, and as they were about to enter Egypt, Abram actually told Sarai to lie and to say that she was his sister because he feared that if they knew that she was his wife, they would kill him. So she did in fact lie, and Pharaoh welcomed them both into his house. But because she lied, God actually began to afflict Pharaoh with great plagues. Once Pharaoh realized that they had been lying, he sent them on their way. My takeaway in this chapter is this. This chapter deals with service. Just like Abram, God is calling each of us to a life of service. It may not be asking us to pick up and to move where we are, but it could be something as simple as serving in your church, serving in your community, leading a Bible study. Whatever the case may be, God is calling each and every one of us to form some form of service. Three is a crowd is the theme of chapter 13. Abram is still traveling with Sarai and their nephew Lot, and in addition to themselves, they're also traveling with a lot of livestock and herdsmen, and evidently there is quite a bit of strife between everyone. So Abram and Lot get together and discuss it, and they decide that it would be best for them to go their separate ways. So Abram tells Lot to choose the parcel of land that he would like, and he would actually go the opposite direction. Some people ask why Abram would give Lot first choice, and some believe that he was showing his faith in God, knowing that God would take care of him. So Lot takes a look at both parcels of land, and he chooses the more lush and green portion of land. He actually chose the Jordan Valley, and Abram traveled east and settled into the land of Canaan. The Lord spoke to Abram and told him to look in every direction as far as his eyes could see, and he told him that actually that land would belong to his offspring forever. Today's takeaway is this: to have faith like Abram. Even when I'm tempted to hoard things for myself or I want to be first in line, I need to trust that God will provide. Chapter 14. Battle after battle is how chapter 14 begins. In the midst of all the fighting, Lot and all of his possessions were actually captured. Word was sent to his uncle Abram, and Abram proceeded to gather his trained men and set out to rescue his nephew Lot. Abram and his men succeeded and actually took back all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah, as well as Lot, women, and other captives. The king of Sodom was so impressed with Abram, he went to meet him and praised God for delivering the people and the possessions into Abram's hands. Abram gives the king of Salem 10% of all of his possessions, or the possessions that he had gotten. This is actually the first mention of tithing in the Bible. It's believed that Abram made the offering out of gratitude for the victory and the deliverance of his nephew Lot. The king also proposed that Abram keep the rest of the possessions, but Abram refused. Now, my takeaway on this chapter is this: in the face of generosity, I need to remember to give back. God's goodness in our lives, even in the small things, should never go unrecognized. Chapter 15 starts with Abram seeing things. God actually speaks to him through a vision and talks to him about the fact that he and Sarai still do not have a child. During this vision, he actually tells Abram to go outside and look at the night sky, and that one day his descendants will be more numerous than the stars in that sky. It is believed that Abram may have been somewhat in a down mood because if you'll remember in the last chapter, he had just won a major battle. And it's almost human nature for us sometimes to be down after a huge victory. This is also the time that Satan typically uses to attack our belief. I think it's important to really look at Abram's faith at this point. If you think about it, during that time, there was no Bible, he did not attend a church, and people really had no idea what would happen to them after they died. I don't know about you, but it would have been very difficult for me to believe during that time period. Abram, later in the chapter, proceeded to make an offering to God and then fell into a very deep sleep. The Lord appeared again, but this time it was in a dream. God explained the difficulties that Abram's people would face, but promised in the end they would be delivered. God later made a covenant with Abram concerning the fact that all of the land in that area would be his. My takeaway is this: as humans, we always have doubts and struggles at times with our faith, and that's okay. What's not okay is to stay in that mindset. It's important to take advantage of the resources available to us, such as reading the Bible, gathering with other believers, and going to God in prayer and asking for help with our unbelief. Thanks so much for joining me this week. I'll see you back here again next week.